Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier. And having taken a few presentations to examine the mobilisation of human and economic resources in World War I want to end by focusing on the mobilisation of women. Surely a key indicator that World War I was a total war. Of course, the link is with conscription. As more and more men were called up to fight or volunteered to do so, the more women were needed in the farms and factories on the home front. Look at Britain as early as mid-1915. 23.8% of male employees in the chemical and explosives industry, 23.7% of those in electrical engineering, 21.8% of miners, 19.5% from engineering trades, 18.8% from the iron and steel industries, and even 16.8% of those in small arms manufacturing had all enlisted. Women were of course an obvious place to turn to in order to fill all those gaps. But it wasn't just the number of women employed that we should consider. Before the war, there had been more than 1 million women in domestic service. It was the fact that they were replacing men in men's jobs. And I do put men's jobs in inverted commas. It's estimated that 2 million women took over men's jobs. It peaked in 1918 when Russia left the war, because this meant that Germany was able to transfer men from the Eastern Front, which meant that Britain and France had to find more men to counter them. This could only be done by finding men from amongst the skilled munitions workers, who would have to be replaced by women, and those men who were unfit for military service. So it was that women were brought into the workforce on a scale unprecedented since the beginning of industrialisation. It was crucial to Britain's industrial output. In Britain, the percentage of women in the industrial workforce rose from 24% in 1914, peaking in 1918 at almost 38%. And this was much more pronounced in some sectors. For example, in the metal trades, female labour went up from 9.4% to 24.6% of the overall labour force. In chemicals, the rise was from just a tweak over 20% to 39%. And in government establishments, which included the newly established munitions factories, the increase was staggering, from a little under 3% to more than 46%. The trade unions were concerned about the dilution of the labour force with unskilled, cheaper labour, particularly that of women. This is the breaking down of complex, skilled engineering jobs into smaller, simpler tasks that could be performed by unskilled or semi-skilled workers. The trade unions argued that their employers should not be allowed to use the war to increase profits at their employees' expense. The so-called Treasury Agreement of 1915, made law in the Munitions of War Act of 1915, saw major employers agree to limit their profits for the duration of the war, whilst trade unions agreed to a temporary dilution of the labour force, as well as agreeing to extend working hours and give a pledge to avoid strikes in munitions factories. For the munitionettes, that's women working in the munitions factories, there were very real hazards. In Britain, women working with the explosive TNT were also known as canaries, due to the yellowing of their skin, a symptom of TNT poisoning. 61 women were to die of poisoning. That was not the only danger, though. A fire in a TNT factory in London led to an explosion that killed 69 women and severely injured a further 72. Other accidents accounted for 81 more deaths. In agriculture, the Women's Land Army provided a maximum working strength of 16,000 to complement the approximately 180,000 village women working on the farms. Now, in my Mobilising for Food video, I've talked about how the likes of conscripted soldiers deemed unfit for service, the temporary return of ploughmen, the use of prisoners of war, and the use of children. But this must not detract from the part women played. It was vital. And a few words on women in other countries. In France, Clemenceau epitomised total war when he declared in March 1918, "Home policy, I wage war. Foreign policy, I wage war. All the time, I wage war." Well, French women in the industrial workforce, already at a high level of 35% in 1911, still rose to 40% by 1918. 400,000 women by the war's end were added to the French workforce. In Russia, the figures rose from 26% pre-war to 46% by the end of the war. And in Germany, by 1918, women constituted 55% of their industrial workforce. Now, many German women were working in factories before the war, but total war meant that many more were now doing so, and they were doing more skilled work. In the Krupp factory, Germany's biggest munitions factory, there had been less than 1,000 women out of a workforce of over 40,000 before the war. In 1918, there were more than 28,000 women out of a workforce of around 120,000. So, from around 1 in 40 before the war to around 1 in 4 during the war. And whereas before the war women had been mostly employed as cleaners or kitchen staff, in 1918, as they were in Britain, they were filling the shelves with gunpowder and working machinery. Around 1.5 million German women were employed in the war industries. The male workforce in German industries that were absolutely critical to the war effort, mining, steel munitions and shipbuilding, were exempt from conscription. But women were still vitally important. In some of the Austro-Hungarian munitions factories, women comprised almost 80% of the workforce, whilst Vienna's trams were virtually run by women. And finally, women also served in uniform. Over 100,000 British women in all three services, some 9,000 women in France, as cooks, clerks, telephone operators and mechanics in the army, in the likes of wireless telegraphy and intelligence in the navy, as clerks, drivers and airplane mechanics in the Air Force. Then there were the doctors, nurses and ambulance drivers. The same with Italian women and American women, German women too, and Russian women. Indeed, the last word must go to Russian women, of whom some 5,000 served in women-only combat units. Now, these units were formed in order to shame men into enlisting, but one unit at least did see combat. So the mobilisation of women, to add to my other presentations on the mobilisation for total war in World War I. Collectively, they should be really useful for any question you might face on mobilising resources, a vital part in explaining the outcome of wars. Now, don't forget that I may have a slot available if you feel you would benefit from tutorials. Just get your parents to contact me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com and we'll see if we can sort something out. They will, of course, be focused on your specific needs, and I am flexible on price. I want to help, not get rich, which is just as well. In fact, if you want to do them with a friend, that's great. It can really help spark ideas, and it cuts the cost. Anyway, let me end by thanking you for listening, and by wishing you the very best of luck with your studies. Cheers.